Hello and welcome to today's ELRC workshop on CEF AT and the eTranslation program. My name is Markus Foti and I'm the program manager for eTranslation, the machine translation of the CEF AT program. Our work began by building a machine translation system called MTADC. This was built with the technology of the time, statistical machine translation, using a program called Moses at its heart. And it was built using the translation history of the work of 1600 DGT translators into all EU languages. It was launched in June 2013 with a lot of advantages, a lot of usefulness for the in-house translators. Its focus was on translating legal style documents, the kind of work that is done day to day within the Commission. MTADC served its initial user base of official translators within the institutions quite well, but over time certain shortcomings of the initial design became apparent, especially the fact that a lot of websites wanted to connect in order to provide quick translation of small bits of text. In conjunction with DG Connect and the digital single market, which is being fostered by the Connecting Europe facility, DGT has now been working on improving MTADC into eTranslation. We launched the initial service, a minimal service for web snippets only, in July 2017, and the full service, which will eventually replace the existing MTADC, in November 2017. The first service was good for technical users who wanted to connect their websites or their applications for quick, short translation. The full launch enabled handling of documents and in all Office formats, as well as output in PDF, doc, docx, TMX files, and so on for translators. There were a lot of technological changes that lay behind this development as well. We reassessed the whole internal architecture to speed it up, to make it more robust, and we moved to the cloud. This was a very significant move for us because the cloud gave us access to the hardware, which enabled us to follow the newest revolution in machine translation, which is the change from the old statistical machine translation paradigm to the new neural machine translation paradigm. This new paradigm is based on new data, big data, artificial intelligence, and it requires powerful machines. We're further expanding into the full CEF AT program to provide more services, more natural language processing services, such as transliteration or named entity recognition. Named entity recognition is something that enables the system to know that when you're talking about President George Bush of the United States, you're going to get a name, George Bush, and not a reference to a small tree-like plant instead. DG Connect also provides funding for projects which are up to you to propose and which may be eligible for funding up to 75%. Now, what does eTranslation offer you now? There are two ways to access it. First of all, as an individual, you can access the web page and submit translations, snippets, documents, as you prefer, all Office formats, PDF. You can get out the same format. You can get out TMX if you're a translator for use in CAT tools such as Trados Studio. And of course, machine-to-machine use, which enables websites, web pages, application owners to connect and render their application multilingual. The users, however, are a little bit limited. It is not within our remit to compete with the publicly available services. We are aiming at an administrative audience with particular needs and particular concerns. First of all, under the CEF AT program, we're looking at digital service infrastructures which are being built under the digital single market to provide European citizens with public services, cross-border public services, such as EESSI, which enables, for example, your pension information to travel from one country to the other, as well as health and so on when you're on vacation, if you decide to change countries, when you go back to your country of origin, having spent 10, 15, 20 years working abroad. There's also the online dispute resolution system, which it's intended to enable people to solve disputes online and provides a translation service in the case of, say, someone who from Germany has made a purchase from Finland, but their mastery of Finnish is not perfect. They can use this service to solve the problem, hopefully amicably. Another service which is available is the Open Data Portal, which gathers all of the information, all of the metadata from open data portals throughout the EU states, consolidates them and translates them so that if you're interested in Portuguese metadata, you don't have to go only to the Portuguese site. You can go to a central site, search in your language, or from another point of view, if you're looking for all available European metadata on a certain topic, you can do this search centrally and then find out which databases, which national databases have the information that specifically interests you. We also cover the cultural domain with Europeana, a site which lists and displays all European cultural artifacts, or as many as they can. Constantly growing list, and of course that is intended to cover all of Europe in all European languages. Another target audience is system suppliers. There are sites such as Eurlex, NLEX, the Internal Market Information System. These are commission sites which enable users to look up information, in the case of Eurlex, European legislation, in the case of NLEX, national legislation, in the case of the Internal Market Information System, specific certificates, equivalencies between countries. You can submit your Portuguese certificate to the Internal Market Information System and have it translated into German if you're moving to Germany, so that you can demonstrate credentials. One example of a public website which uses eTranslation is the Publications Office's NLEX, which enables you to search through national databases in your own language. So if we take the example of Italy, if you want to search through Italian legislation to find what refers to employment, you click to open the machine translation option and activate machine translation. Once the system has completed its translation, you can scroll through the list in the language that you prefer. Other sites use machine translation to similar effect, such as the European Data Portal, which I mentioned earlier. Do your search in Greek and get your results in English. If you want to provide this sort of functionality within your website, how do you do it? If you're a DSI or a public administration, you can contact us at the email address given in the slide. We'll provide the technical documentation, contact us for your credentials so that you can connect, and then adapt your service to multilingual use. And of course, the individuals in public administrations who have to regularly deal with citizens from their own countries, but also citizens, immigrants, tourists passing through in various languages. Some of you may have used this interface before, MTIDC, the machine translation web page. This is the document submission page. The site has been modernized and allows access to the new eTranslation system, which offers increased speed and better quality translation through the neural machine translation system. What are the benefits of this system? Well, first of all, languages, although they provide great cultural richness and can be fascinating, when working across languages, translation helps to increase speed and productivity. The amount of translation that is required is increasing exponentially, and it simply cannot be handled only by human translators. There is, of course, also in conjunction with that an effort to reduce costs and basically to facilitate information exchange. What does eTranslation offer? Well, first of all, the original focus was on documents themselves. So you can submit documents and have them returned to you as the same kind of document with the same formatting. You can submit one original, get many translations back into different languages at the same time, or you can submit a number of documents and get a number of documents back at the same time. As I mentioned earlier, the focus really was on privacy. All documents are deleted 24 hours after they've been processed. Why do we keep them for 24 hours? Well, in case of troubleshooting, we do have to be able to look back and say, wait, why was this document not processed? Why was this not translated correctly? If the documents you are submitting are of a more confidential nature, you may also want to activate the delete after download functionality, which means once you have received your document, all trace of that document will be deleted from our system. We do keep internal statistics to keep track of how many translations have been submitted, how many pages have been translated yearly, which languages are the most popular. Another particular feature of eTranslation is that we have no interest in keeping the intellectual property rights of your document. Once you have submitted the document and you have the translation returned to you, the IPR rights are transferred to you and you are the owner of the document. This is in contrast to other publicly available services. Nor do we have any interest in the content of your documents. Our goal is to provide a public service to all of the EU member states. How does machine translation work? When MT@EC launched, it was based on the type of system which was prevalent at the time, statistical machine translation. MT@EC was built on EU translations only, which is a strong point if you're someone working in the EU translations. But I think that all of you in all of your countries will agree that the type of language used within the EU institutions is not really typical of the same language spoken in its home country. So the flavor of translations offered by eTranslation has a sort of legalistic, bureaucratic tone. We want to expand beyond that. MT@EC covered all 24 EU languages. Euramis, which is the database of translations done at the European Commission, covers EU policies, subjects, language, limited everyday language. There are some citizens' letters, newspaper articles, press releases, but the bulk of it is legislation in progress. We took those translations, fed them into our Moses-based engines, Moses being the heart of a statistical machine translation system, also developed in part with funding from DG Connect. These sorts of systems perform well when they're trained on very large amounts of data. This is why we're here today, in order to expand beyond this legalistic sort of language that we have, to expand beyond the languages that we have, to expand with regard to the domains that we cover. On our side, in addition to broadening the scope, we're using different technology to handle this data. We've moved on to neural machine translation. If you've been following developments in this field, you'll know that it's a revolution over the past 2 years, perhaps. All of the big players have been moving towards this system. It's a different type of approach. It's machine learning, artificial intelligence. Philosophers may disagree on whether it is intelligence or isn't intelligence, whether it's faking intelligence, but with regard to producing the sorts of systems that we're looking for, we can assume that the computer is tasked with learning how to translate based on the data provided by itself. The computer builds its own rules. We don't build the rules, but we have to feed it with the proper data. This is a radical departure from the SMT approaches, which were phrase-based. It would basically, Moses would chop up sentences into smaller pieces, record them all in almost a sort of huge dictionary, along with extra data on the frequency of certain phrases, how often this was translated as this, how often that was translated as that. But it was a very strictly mathematical approach. Now, what are the results of neural machine translation? First of all, translations read better. They're more fluent, they're more grammatical. Depending on the languages that you work with, you will have seen performance that varies with statistical machine translation from very good, in the case of, say, English into Maltese, English into Bulgarian, French into English, or very poor, anything into the Finno-Ugric languages such as Hungarian, Finnish, Estonian. Neural machine translation handles these languages much better. It's better able to fill in the gaps in data used for training, and it's better for highly inflected languages such as German and Hungarian. Certainly, neural machine translation is the direction in which the field is headed, and the question has to be now, will statistical machine translation become obsolete? fewer and fewer systems are using it, there is less and less development. We think that neural machine translation will become the completely dominant paradigm in the next few years. Let me give you an example of the difference in performance between the two systems. I've taken one of the worst performing language pairs, which is Hungarian into English, fed it through the earlier MTADC system with a Moses-based statistical machine translation heart, and through eTranslation running on a neural machine translation system. I'm not going to attempt to read the original Hungarian, but let's take a look at the proposed translations. MTADC gives you online pot may not in itself and not the substantive change to reduce hidden revenue at least, which is pretty well incomprehensible. And you'll note that the system was also defeated at the end of the phrase by the words highlighted in red. The neural machine translation proposes the online retention cannot and did not make a significant difference in the reduction of the hidden revenue. Perhaps not perfect English, but at least you can begin to understand the meaning. It also proposed a translation for the phrase which the statistical system was unable to translate, the success of the so-called tax force. Note that these systems were trained also on the same data, so neural machine translation is more flexible and more able to deal with unknown words. Let's take a look at a newspaper article in a European field. This article is on the abolition of mobile roaming charges, so you would expect most of the words to be known by the MTADC system. And indeed, most of it is, and the translation is quite good. However, we have no understanding of the Federal Consumer Center in Brussels when written in Greek, and we've simply returned the Greek word. eTranslation will now transliterate this word into the Roman alphabet, or vice versa, if you're translating from a language that uses the Roman alphabet into Bulgarian or Greek into that alphabet. Another example of a shortcoming is translation from the Greek, where the English is rendered as the table was created in 1907 to 1908. You may not speak Greek, but in fact the Greek word refers not to a table, but to a painting, which in Greek is the same word. So there was a failure to disambiguate here. Let's see how eTranslation performs with what we would call in-domain text. I've taken a piece of European legislation, l'autorité pour les partis politiques européens, les fondations politiques européennes, etc., a number of recitals, the typical day-to-day work of the European Commission. We're going to translate from French into English, and you'll see that the translation is very good. Authority for European political parties and European political foundations, having regard to the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, etc., etc., etc. Some of the problems of in-domain and out-of-domain language continue. At the Commission, we try to use gender-neutral language. I'm thinking here of someone purchasing a chair, bringing it home, and the first time you sit on it, bang, the leg is broken because it was never in good shape. Let's see how the system deals with this. As you can see, because we do not refer to chairmen and chairwomen in our meetings, we refer to the president. eTranslation has rendered the translation as El Presidente tenía un componente roto, referring to the person as opposed to the piece of furniture. This is a real problem with the data that we have, and it crosses across many languages. Again, il presidente. This is also why we're here today. We need to broaden the type of language that eTranslation can handle so that you can choose if you would like to deal with an administrative text where chair should be translated as il presidente, or where chair should be translated as the piece of furniture. We would love to have more data for all languages, better lexical coverage for all languages, so that we can adapt our machine translation to your domain or subject matter. The example I gave was general language. We already cover legal language because of internal EU institutional translations, but we don't necessarily cover technical specialisms, sociology, other fields. In the transition from MTEDC to eTranslation, we've tried to take account of many of the reports, the issues raised by our users, such as the European Data Portal, eJustice, Europeana, ESSI, ODR, the others that I mentioned earlier. First among these was speed, and we're very pleased to announce that with a redesign of the system itself and being hosted on more powerful machines on the cloud, we think we have achieved our goal. We would like to address new languages. There's particular demand for Arabic, Russian, Turkish, Chinese, and more formats, such as PDF. MTEDC never produced PDF as output. To my mind, this was not really a normal goal for a machine translation, which is by its nature imperfect, and you will want to edit it. But there are certain cases, such as patents, where they wish to deliver a final document which would serve as information, but they could be sure it hadn't been changed. And JSON, for example, which is a technical format. Named entity recognition, I gave the example of George Bush earlier, and of course transliteration. We've now seen cases where a user who does not speak the original language would be put in front of a series of letters that they're unable to interpret. Our goal is to provide support for languages with fewer speakers that don't necessarily attract much attention from the big private players. Languages such as Maltese, Estonian, Finnish, Latvian. We also provide opportunities for the private sector through the grants and the generic services offered by DG Connect. And we want to raise the profile of language technologies, increasing demand and increasing what becomes available also through the private sector. I've been speaking mostly about machine translation, but ELRC is about data, and this is another product which will be offered as part of CEF. The data which is collected, provided that you give clearance for it to be made available, will be made available to everyone. So you, if you work in this field, will also have access to a broader range of data. Scientists, data scientists, academics will have access to something which one never knows what can come out of this rapidly developing field. With CEF and eTranslation, we hope we'll be able to solve your language problems. Thank you.